Good afternoon, everybody. It is so funny. Sometimes when you're the speaker after lunch, I'm sure you've heard those, the speaker will be like, oh, I hope you didn't have too many carbohydrates and now you're so relaxed and will you listen to me? I'm literally disturbing your lunch. I'm getting in the way of you and a piece of meat, which I know is #1 rule in South Africa, don't do it. So thank you for your gracious attention. And if you do want to finish up, of course, please feel free. I know the food here has been excellent. So good afternoon. My name is Jos, and indeed, I've spent a big chunk of my life traveling. Grew up in 15 countries, of which one of those was South Africa. I had the pleasure of living in your beautiful country for about 5 years, and then became a permanent resident and went back and forth and very much enjoy coming back and being here. And something I want to start by saying is how much I admire and respect South African people and what you stand for. And when I do this talk in other countries, I'll talk about resilience. But I don't want to do that here because I know how resilient you are. And I was saying yesterday during a talk that I used to live in Senegal, West Africa, and sometimes the power would go out there, and we just wouldn't have power. Now, I know obviously here you've gone through quite a bit with load shedding. And I think if I compare the two experiences of what it was like in Senegal when we wouldn't have electricity versus what it's like here, it almost upsets me more here. Because I know that this country has infrastructure that can do better. And while I don't want to compare, I do want to say that sometimes the resiliency of South African people, you're so good, you're so well trained at showing up and making the most of any situation, almost to a detriment, if you don't mind me saying so. So I want to honor that and say how much I appreciate what you do for your fellow country people. And before this talk, I was actually speaking with somebody who's in the audience today, just having a quick chat, catch up. I've known this person for a couple of years, and we were kind of joking about what it's like as well for South Africans when you travel. And I really do believe that when you travel, you're reminded of the versatility and the courage within your own country, which is something that you can actually be very, very proud of. So why great ideas die, first of all? I really regret calling my keynote this. It is like a bold title. And then I have to deliver in 45 minutes. But it gets worse. I'm actually writing a book on the topic as well. It's supposed to be finished in November this year. And it's just, it doesn't stop. There's so many reasons why great ideas die. And one of those reasons is, we get in the way of them. We don't understand the technology around us. We aren't able to synthesize fast enough. So even though there are many reasons, I'm going to try and hone in on a few today, particularly as it relates to skills, because that's exactly what today is all about. Some of you might recognize this aircraft. This is a Cessna. It's one of my favorite for private flights. It's a great aircraft. But unfortunately, this aircraft crashed in the Colombian Amazon jungle about 60 days ago. Some of you might have seen the headline that 4 children survived. How many of you saw that headline? All right, so about half of the room. So this Cessna crashed. It had a couple of passengers on it, and all the adults died, and the 4 children on this plane were missing. Search parties were flown into this Colombian Amazon jungle, including 10 dogs from Belgium, those incredible dogs. And these volunteer search parties searched a 100-kilometer radius around this Cessna to try and find these children. A 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 11-month baby. After 40 days of searching, they were like, there's no way these kids survived. Imagine that. Not only a plane crash, their mother was on the plane with them. They lost their mother on that flight. How traumatic, how scary. If any of you ever watched National Geographic, you might have seen that show, I Shouldn't Be Alive. Anyone has seen that? You know, you see people and they're like, this Amazon jungle, it's so dense, there's no way, like, I couldn't believe it. Well, after 40 days, they found these kids. And the first question they asked them was, what do you need? What do you need? Guess what? Dessert. They need a dessert, which is so sweet, right? But anyway, I was reading about this because I thought this is fascinating, that these kids could survive for 40 days in the jungle like this. And there's some beautiful, beautiful stories that come out from humanity at this point, right? Because what they had done, these kids were raised by their grandmother, abuela, and they had recorded in the mother tongue of abuela her voice saying to these children, it's okay, you're safe, these planes are searching for you, we want to help you, this is me, your grandmother. And they did that because they wanted these children not to be afraid. So they had abuela's voice, they had flown-in dogs from Belgium, they had hundreds of indigenous people join this search party, and finally on the 40th day, they found these children in a reasonably okay state. And they asked abuela, how did your grandchildren survive? How did your grandchildren survive this ordeal? And she said, it's because they're children of Mother Earth. They're children of Mother Earth. And I was thinking about that, what that means, and what that means for a 13-year-old to keep her 11-month-old sibling alive. And to me, that's leadership, right? I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. A plane crash, you lose your mom, you're not even a teenager yet, you've got a kid under one that you're taking care of, everywhere you look is poisonous, you're afraid of the planes that are circling because actually there's guerrilla wars in your country, and you still survived, you still showed up as a leader. So you, as a CIO today, man, we're in the middle of a massive crash. This is not an easy time to be doing what you're doing. You're synthesizing across a variety of exponential changes in technology and trying to make sense, pulling that together for your businesses. But this is where you get to be a real leader, a real hero. And I would like to say that because I think leadership goes far beyond what we have deduced it to be. It's actually so much deeper. It actually is about that consistent synthesis and connection. So today I want you to focus on a few things: leadership, expectation versus reality when it comes to skills, and collective intelligence. And I keep collective intelligence on there because it actually is a very big part of skills development, and it's a secret that you South Africans already have. I want to show you how you can tap into that secret better and faster. Now, your takeaways will largely be around how they happen, these great ideas, how they die, and what you should do when you get home. And when I say home, I mean back to your businesses, back to your teams. Before we do that, I'm going to take you to Athens, Greece. Have any of you been to Greece? Okay, cool, nice. It is an amazing country. And actually, if you think about Greece, think about kind of where Socrates and Aristotle were teaching. How many of you remember or know how Socrates used to teach? How did Socrates develop skills amongst his pupils? Yeah, awesome. Yeah, ask them questions. Absolutely. Sit, relax, ask questions, talk, philosophize, discuss. Discuss about what it takes to be a better person, what it takes to show up in the world, how we can be our best selves. That was actually a lot of the discussions that happened. So Greece, for me, is a really wonderful way to think about learning, skills development, and what it means to show up as a leader in the world today. But Greece has another meaning for me because 2019, pandemic was about kind of starting, and I moved between Athens and Cape Town as a pandemic strategy, which by the way was legit. Okay, it was very cool to be on Santorini when no one else was there. I was like, should I go check out that sunset? Normally you have to be there at 3 p.m. It was amazing. But I started a company there. And during the pandemic, I taught myself machine learning. And I was like, okay, well, this seems like a good time to be doing this because nothing else is really happening. And together with my developers in Greece, we started thinking about the future of education. Now, because I'd spent 5 years living in South Africa, I had also lived in South Sudan, in Eritrea, and in Senegal. I was kind of thinking about this skills issue that we have largely across the African continent. So you got millions of kids, millions of young people that could reach their full potential. We actually have access to the technology and the platforms to bring them very good learning, very good skills development, but it's not happening. So together with my team in 2020, we started building AI mentors. And these AI mentors, they work very simply. What we did was the following. We would take content, curricula, and research. We would analyze it, understand it. We would use LMs, large models. And I mean, this was like back in the day when it was GPT-2, right? So we were really like starting quite early with this stuff. Applying toxicity meters, developing different personalities. Then we would take these teachers and deploy them on Microsoft Teams or WhatsApp. WhatsApp primarily because we understand that in some countries it's easier to access a large user base and get them the skills training that they need. And then we would assess in real time, but not on skills like math, which is fine, math is cool, but on entrepreneurship and innovation and critical thinking and creativity. So we use this really cool taxonomy, a really cool pedagogical model where we were testing on skills that actually can make a difference, that can help you start your business one day, that can empower you. And then we would provide this feedback and close the learning gap on a WhatsApp engagement platform. This was 2020, I'm like, this idea is dope. Like, this is gonna work. I felt really confident, and every startup is like, it's difficult, but I was like, this makes total sense. The pandemic hit, schools closed their doors, universities didn't want to talk to us. I basically went from feeling really good about this to having nothing. My boyfriend broke up with me. I was one of those millennials that moved back in with her parents. I had worked in Dubai for 5 years to make money, which I had now put into my startup, which was now gone. So I was pretty much back to scratch. And I was living at home. And it was the pits. It was really tough. And there was no friends because, well, you remember that time. It was quite lonely. And I was like, well, this sucks. And my team and I, we would email and try and get on the radar of these schools and universities and try and get them to talk to us. And we just got no after no after no after no for 3 years straight. I have moved out of my parents' place since then. I managed to buy a property and get myself back. You can only hear, do you have any laundry? So many times before you're like, okay, there's a hard no on this situation. But I'm telling you this because I never like to waste an opportunity. And this whole experience got me thinking, why did this idea die? Like, everybody's talking about needing this, why did it die? So I started thinking about what I felt was a pretty good idea and wanting to understand why it died. So I got down to thinking about a formula, right? And by the way, I'm a person that believes in the power of small teams. I really believe that small teams are incredible. You don't have silos, you don't have a lot of bureaucracy, but you can move quick, it's agile, it's awesome. So nobody on my team left, by the way, even when I couldn't pay salaries, which I'm very proud of. But now I'm thinking, okay, the first thing we need to do is understand our business. Are we in the game of selling AI when nobody's ready to talk about it? Or are we in the game of changing the lives of millions of learners across the world? So what are you in the game of today? What is your job as a CIO at your business? Are you in the game of resetting passwords or like helping people manage a dashboard? No, your game is much bigger than that. What are you in the game of? What are you making better, easier, and more efficient for South Africa today and in 5 years? So that is really the starting point. The second thing I realized was this base camp idea. If nobody on your team is leaving during a good time, okay, cool. If nobody on your team is leaving during a bad time, what does that say about you as a leader? How are you showing up? You don't need to say this. You can write it down for yourself. But how are you showing up? What's your mindset in that moment? We heard it earlier today. Mindset, resilience, abundance, love. What mindset, exponential, what are you showing up with that makes it so that your team doesn't leave? And not only that, so that your team is able to thrive when new technology hits the market and becomes commonplace. And the X factor. What makes your team unique? What about your team as a CIO today makes your team unique? Because you're all peers in here, but your team has something special. And leadership and skills development is really about getting that special X factor out of your team. And then we look at positioning and we look at clarity, right? Communicating with clarity. I'm going to leave those two, the other three out today, but I'm going to focus on these two with you today. So how are we showing up at that base camp and what's our X factor? Now, I like to think of the base camp formula in the following way. Small team success or team success is your state, right? Are you open? Are you receiving? Are you ready to rock and roll? How are you showing up? Did you eat a lot of sugar? Did you not? What's your body telling you? Are you checked in with your physiology? Is your breathing working? What's your state? And your mindset. What's your mindset? Are you resilient? Are you abundant? Are you creative? Are you exponential? How are you checking in today for your team? That's how you arrive at your base camp. Then momentum. Now we always say that timing is everything. We say that timing is half the battle. Because timing can work out. But if you're not ready to seize that moment and to grab that opportunity, it doesn't really matter. So momentum, are you able to recognize an opportunity when it's in front of you? And is your team behind you ready to rock and roll? Are you ready to go? And if you align that with your intention, and I'm genuinely a positive person, I genuinely believe that we're here to create better, bigger things that are servicing the larger good. So if I'm aligning with that intention, and I'm doing it by providing safety for my team to explore and to experiment, then I feel like I'm on a good path. So that's how that worked for me. And I wanted to make sure that I'd had all these factors in place with my team as well. And if I want to talk quickly about mindsets, because we heard it earlier today. We've got this idea of this abundance mindset, right? Knowing that there's enough out there, which is very difficult when you are dealing with things like load shedding or challenges in infrastructure. Longevity mindset, looking at the lifespan. What are we creating for? What's that future looking like? Being purpose-driven. Understanding exponentials. A moonshot mindset, for me, that's about learning. For you, it might be something very, very different, very personal. And gratitude. Being grateful for how we're showing up every day. I have my own. I like to think about love as being one. I like to think about surrendering. Sometimes there's just really not much we can do. The Wi-Fi didn't work earlier. Okay, cool, whatever. And then creativity, which I know you have a lot of in this country. And if we think about work and how it's changing, we're going through another revolution/evolution. There's a book by a professor called Ingo Piepers from the University of Amsterdam. This book is called The Thermodynamics of War and Social Evolution. And I saw it, I'm like, that sounds like a really cool summer read. So I looked it up. It's 731 pages. And I was like, that seems a bit heavy. I'm going to try and give this a go. So I looked on the Dutch Amazon, which is bol.com, because by now I'm living in the Netherlands. And I see that Mr. Piepers has only written this book in Dutch. I'm like, dang. I speak Dutch, I understand it, but I don't think I'm going to be able to read 731 pages by an academic, by a professor on the thermodynamics of war and social evolution in Dutch. So I found this gentleman online on LinkedIn and I said, dear Professor Piepers, I found your book online. I'd really like to order it, but it's 731 pages in Dutch. And even though I read in Dutch, I'd really like it in English. And you know how academics are. They want you to read their work because it's like 3 people every decade that do, right? So this guy, he writes me back within like 20 minutes. He's like, no problem. Here's a PDF in English. And I'm like, oh man, a PDF? Like what am I gonna like scroll on my phone? And like he's got all these graphs and this is not gonna work. So I emailed him back. I'm like, thank you so much, Professor, with all due respect. Like I'm afraid I can't read this PDF on my phone. I might be a millennial, but I really like paper. Is there anything we can do? He goes, don't worry, I got you. I'm gonna mail you the book by post. So 2 days later, I get this 731-page book, which weighs 2.2 kilos. I know, because I weighed it. And now I'm like trying to read it in bed. So it like would fall, no, it wasn't that bad. But I got to 60, 70 pages in it. I got the gist of it. I'm gonna break it down for you real quick so you don't have to read it. But long story short, what Dr. Piepers argues is that we go through cycles. We go through war cycles and we go through relatively peaceful, stable periods. After 1945, across the European continent, we were going through a relatively stable, peaceful period. We had kind of come to this new world order after World War II, We had agreed with some United Nations, with Bretton Woods, that things were going to be a certain order, we were going to be nice to each other, etc. February 24, 2022, Putin decided that was no longer applicable, so he was like, I'm going to just switch this up. Now we find ourselves in the war cycle, and Dr. Peepers actually predicted this would happen. In 2016, this book was published, and he said, we're going to go back into this war cycle in 2019, okay, pandemic, and it's going to continue. Does anybody want to guess how long? How long are we going to be in this current war cycle? And this really will help you relax. 10 years. 10 years? 19. So it's cool because we're already going through it a little bit, right? We've already gotten a couple years down. And I say that because for me, it was really difficult to process what was happening in Ukraine. It was very difficult to process Russia's unprovoked entry of a sovereign nation in 2022. I struggled with that information. But understanding that this is a cycle helps. So we know now that we're going through this cycle, and I want to add a third piece, the pandemic, the unprovoked invasion of a sovereign nation. What do you think is the third piece that I feel might be contributing to a war cycle? Climate change, fair enough. I would argue AI. I would argue that AI, not because it's a fearful technology, not that we have to be afraid of it, but the disruption that it's causing now that it's become commonplace, now that people are aware and awake, it's quite disruptive. And it really is an evolution and a revolution in the way that we are going to be working. So if we think about that and we think about what we are hiring for and the skills that we're going to need in our workplace, I'd like to start by asking you a very simple question. How many of you have a chief AI strategist on board? I know you're all CIOs. I see one person raise their hand. That's amazing. We had one person yesterday raise their hand and 0 people on day 1. And I think it's really fascinating. And I'm not trying to argue that the CIO role is more or less important. I'm not saying that. But in my small business, because we're about 9 people, we have a chief AI strategist, and literally this person plays with the thousands of tools that come out each day to make sense of what's out there. And I've heard the argument in South Africa that small to medium enterprises are going to be left behind while the big players have larger R&D budgets and can pump this into development, that can pump this into research, and then these SMEs are going to kind of be on the back foot. How many of you would venture to say that that feels accurate? I feel like no one's raising their hand, but I can hide. I don't have to see what you're feeling, but for me, that's not accurate at all. I think this technology gives a lot of power back, but we need to equip our people with some time. We need to give them the space to explore the tools that are out there. So when I ask, what are we hiring for? Well, for me, getting somebody on board that doesn't have to do the usual day-to-day that a CIO might be responsible for, but actually has some freedom to understand what's going on is critical to business success. And then we talk about expectations versus skills. I heard it earlier where I think this is very interesting, and I'd love to engage in a discussion with you about this, where we go down and we say, well, the skills actually are coding and developing, and we need to understand VR. I'm not so sure that's so true. Yes, we need to have a good grasp of these technologies, but there are so many tools out there right now that can do a pretty good job of coding or even writing tech specs. So my thinking is the ability to understand the lay of the land and tie that all together into a larger strategy is very important. And that's where we get into this really nice interplay of technology, skills, and humans. And I think South Africa has a massive opportunity here. Exponential versus linear. We all know that AI is an exponential technology. And it's interesting because our brains do struggle with this information, but if I were to take 30 steps, how far would I be? I'm short, I know, I'm small. But say I was average height, 30 steps, how far would I be? 20 meters. Yeah, me 20, perhaps someone else here 30. What if I took 30 exponential steps? How far would I be? Please? I think I heard you say something. Yeah? The sun. 26 times around the world, which is weird, which is crazy to think about. But that is really what we're dealing with. And this is how we think it is, how it has been, but this is how it actually is, right? And it is kind of a crazy time. And I always think it's funny when I hear people say that they're AI experts. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, that's not possible, because so much is changing. Maybe you're on top of it for today, but things are going to be different tomorrow. So if we know all that, our responsibility is actually to create more space for great ideas to come to the forefront. Some of you might have heard of this guy called Jeff Bezos. Yeah, he runs a company called Amazon. Man, I always have this idea that Jeff sat for his first date with his ex-wife. I don't know if you know, he got divorced a couple years ago from his wife that he was with 20 years or so. Anyway, I had this idea that they were on a date, probably somewhere in Portland. And, Jeff's all like, so, what do you do? And she's like, oh, actually, I write books. I'm an author. And he's like, wow, you write books? That's great. And she's like, yeah, I really love writing. But what's kind of tricky about being an author is just getting my books sold. Jeff, being an entrepreneur, was like, oh, this is a great first date. And he went off and he's like, built a marketplace for books, right? Which is now Amazon. You don't have to quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that's how their first date went down. And so, fast forward a couple years, Amazon's good, doing well as a business, regardless of what you may feel about Jeff Bezos. But something really interesting happened as well at the business. And I don't know if you know this, but at Amazon, they have this system where everybody can contribute an idea if they have one. And one of the junior team members on Jeff's team suggested this idea for a subscription model. Because he's like, we're selling stuff once off. But what if we just got people to subscribe to buying? So what if we just do that? And they implemented it, and that's basically how we got to Amazon Prime. So what does this tell you about Jeff? What does this tell you about Jeff as a leader? Please. Good at first dates. Yeah, he created an environment for ideas to thrive. Doesn't matter where he's getting them from, he knows how to listen. Or he knew how to listen. I'm not a huge fan of Jeff, but anyway, he knew how to listen. He is creating this environment. So my question to you, as a self-reflection, is how good is your environment right now? How good are you at listening to what's potentially out there? That's number one. Then I think if you have a baby, or you had a baby, or you're about to have a baby, how many chances will you give your baby to walk? Like 3? Like by the third try, your baby's not walking, are you like, you sit down. I am not impressed. You can sit for life. You're done. No. 10 times then? No. 100, 1,000, doesn't matter. Your baby, your baby, is genius. Your baby gets as many chances as it needs to walk. And that's actually part of fostering great ideas. That's what it takes to develop an innovative culture, where you keep allowing for that iteration to happen, which is difficult when we've got fires to put out as CIOs. So I'd like you to think about that right now. What can you do to start creating some space to make sure that you're not always putting out fires, but that your superhero brain, which the world really needs right now, actually has space to do what it does best? Because it's not just your company that relies on it, it's your country that relies on it. The room for great ideas I spent quite a bit of time talking about ChatGPT in other keynotes, but I'm not going to do that today because I presume that most of you have played with it, use it. Yeah. Anyone who hasn't, you're not going to raise your hand, I know. Please don't. Obviously, we've got technology that's going faster than Moore's Law, and we can actually implement this now to solve some of the challenges that you're facing. And I want to do that by swinging back to that X factor that I mentioned earlier, which I believe lives in all of you. So we're all in the same room today, but we all came here from very, very, very different places. And let's break that down to our personal toolkit, okay? Say you have a personal toolkit, it's just on the back, you're carrying it around. It consists of these pieces: what you know, how you perceive, how you solve problems, and how you connect with people. Those are things that you already have in your toolkit. They're going to be very different to mine. They're going to be very different to the person that's sitting next to you. But they actually really matter. Because what we've long assumed to be a toolkit that we like is this top performer right here, right? If we talk about skills. In fact, what we like to think about when we think about really good skills is somebody who has an MBA, maybe they came from a Western-based school, they have a STEM background, they have experience in business and finance, and they have a high IQ. This is traditional top performer. Does that sound about right? Yeah. In fact, this is so right that when I Googled it, I was like, okay, just top performer. This David Smith came up. That was like a template CEO profile that came up, and he lives in Marylebone. That's crazy because that's like the most luxurious, one of the most amazing places in London. You know, I just think it says a lot that this came up in my Google search. So this is what we typically think of as top performers. Now I want you to go back to remember that toolkit that I mentioned earlier that you have, right? That makes us all unique. Now we've got two teams, Team A and Team B, and they're hiring for skills that they need in the 21st century. The first team hires this top performer, and they're like, great, we need these skills. We need somebody with an MBA, Western-based school. This guy's great, STEM background, experience in business, finance, high IQ, fantastic. This is great. And the second team, Team B, they hire the same profile. They're like, these are the skills that we need. This is a great profile. Amazing. Fantastic. Okay, so then Team A is hiring again. And they're like, okay, great. Like, this worked. We've got more work, right? Because we have more work now. Let's just hire another person to handle the work that we have. So they hire the same profile. And now they're like, cool, we've got this. Team A, kind of awkward, led by a minority, so it's like harder to attract, you know, top talent, and hired somebody who didn't quite have all the like top performer skills, the traditional top performer skills, and hired this person who does have experience in business and finance, but is also the primary caretaker of two families, right? Team A, they're like out to lunch, and then they saw their buddy from Stellies, and they were like, yo, we got an opening. Like, do you want to come join our team? And the dude's like, yeah. And then they were like, great. And then they hired this guy, and that was cool. And Team B is like, dang, like, we really, like, okay, you know, we're just going to make do with what we have right now. But then they got lucky. They got this really cool guy. He had run a business. He just didn't feel like going back to the 9 to 5, right? He wanted something more chilled, but came with all this great leadership experience, right? So Team B now has this really cool person that had gone through a career transition, brought a couple of different skills to the table. Team A was like, shit, we need diversity. Okay, we're going to hire this woman. Same profile, super cool, love her. Doesn't say much. Team A was like, hey, you know, this AI thing is starting to become a thing. Maybe we need to hire somebody with AI and machine learning skills. So they're kind of like anticipating. So they got this younger dude in, but he was cool because he did some stint in Bali and speaks a couple languages, right? And then Team A, they were like, well, whatever, we found this guy at a party. And Team B, they're really screwed right now because they have to hire somebody with a liberal arts degree. Not cool. I've got one. So this is the teams that we currently have, right? And if we look at what that means, we see that these skills are here, these top performer skills that we've always been focusing on. And then we see that they're actually also in Team B, but then Team B has like this whole bunch of colorful skills. Yeah. Not only that, we're starting with a baseline of intelligence on both sides that can cover the tasks that we need to have covered. But then Team B is like just super colorful. And they've got this like really nice, diverse way of looking at things. And that, for me, is very exciting. But this is funny, because Team A is actually more confident than Team B. Why? Why? If Team B has skills that cover a wider range, so even though Team B can outperform, and most often does outperform, they're less confident for one main reason, which is that they spend more time discussing. And when we discuss, we get insecure about our opinions. And we're like, maybe this isn't right. Whereas Team A can quickly agree, and they assume that it's correct. But Team B likes to discuss. But also, when we are in a situation where conflict might arise, we potentially don't feel so safe. And you might remember from the formula that psychological safety is very important. And if we don't have that underpinning our teams, it becomes really difficult. But the truth is that actually our world is changing so fast that we need all these skills to perform. We need them to just make sense of this absolute crazy period that we're going through for the next, I already told you, we're still in this war cycle for a little bit, right? So you may or may not believe what I've just shared. So I ran a Monte Carlo model on this theory, and I took a bunch of team formations, and I started saying like, okay, I have got these diverse teams. They all have great ideas, but I need to make sure that these ideas actually make it to reality, right? What do I need for that to happen? And that's actually where safety came in. If teams don't feel safe, if you are the kind of leader that is unable to make your team feel safe, there is a 0.05% of a great idea ever making it to the top. That means no Amazon Prime subscription model for you. So that is actually really, really valid. It's actually a skill to be able to listen and to foster that innovation constantly. Not one time, not 3 times, but thousands of times, just the amount of times that your baby gets to learn how to walk. So this was echoed by Google, who did the same experiment with 200 of their top performing teams, and it showed up the same way, that safety was critical. Now, I want to show you this quickly. If we talk about AI, you might have seen this app, right? This is a finance app. What do you want your app to do? An investing app that provides insights on stocks with an interface for trading, and go. Creating a new app for you. It's literally building this. And now it's going to, I want recession-proof stocks. It's reading Yahoo Finance, Google Finance, Bloomberg, the New York Times. It's showing the stock interface change your AI-powered financial insights. This is a personalized app built in less than a minute based on recession-proof stocks, a prompt by a human. That's it. In 1 minute, this app is built. I want recession-proof stocks. This app will read all the news and say, okay, several stocks performed well during the 2008-2009 recession. Coca-Cola was one of them. Here's where you could be investing. This is what this means for your portfolio, and done. That's 1 minute. You should have seen the CFOs yesterday. I actually literally gave them a minute. This was before lunch. I think they were like, oh my God. I was like, okay, we can take a break, you guys. But this is really how this is going. And it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely incredible. So I want to show you actually how I used, this is a funny story. I have an AI company in education, as you know. I also consult to schools and university on implementing AI at their institutions. And I needed to run some numbers and make sense of where I was spending most of my time. So I asked one of my clients to provide me a spreadsheet with where I had been spending my time. And then this dude gives me this. I'm an artist, okay? This does not work for me. This is painful. This is hell. I don't want to read it. It's read only. I don't know how to copy and paste. I don't understand anything. So I just was like, well, whatever. I'm just going to put it in GPT-4. And hi, can you please analyze this data and tell me how many hours I spent each category? I literally was like, let me just copy and paste the whole dang thing and see what happens. And oh my goodness, it was so good. It did everything for me. It was like, you spent so much time on this. You did this. You did this. At one point, it actually said to me, you're working 60 hours a week. I think you need a work-life balance. Like, I'm not even kidding you. It was very funny. But I don't know if you know this, But this is how good, I mean, just paste whatever, Excel spreadsheets, and I got these answers. And for me, as a small to medium enterprise, that's huge. Now I can actually go and do stuff with my team that matters, that I want to do. So yeah, I even hit my goal, you see? Yeah, that was my goal. Right, thank you. But I don't know how you guys talk to GPT, but I'm always like, hey, thank you so much. You were such great help yesterday. How's it going? Someone's like, you don't have to be that kind. I'm like, no, you do. We don't know when they're going to turn. Your skills right now as a CIO are different to what they've been in the past, right? Like this already started around the pandemic. You need to be adaptable. You need to be creative, and you need to be able to innovate. Get out of the way. Get out of the way of your people's genius. Get out of the way of your own. And there's some simple things that we can do to do that. First, make things practical. These are mobile maker spaces that are currently helping build civilian drones into weapons in Ukraine. Now, with all due respect, I am a peace-loving hippie, and I do not support weaponry, but I do think it's pretty cool that people can take power back and start building things that they feel can protect their own country. I'm giving you this example today because we are in a war cycle. I think it's important to see how much creativity there is around tools that people are able to use and actually build to protect themselves. These mobile maker spaces, I think, would be fantastic for South Africa. And I know you've got concepts like this already, but it essentially is a mobile maker space that provides engineers and technologists with some basic tools in the van so they can build stuff. That's dope. That's a really cool way to spend CIO or CSR time and budget. And then if we think about a few other practical ways, we'll become better at being human, right? That's your job as a CIO right now. I know you know the technical stuff, but what about the human stuff? Because that's actually what's going to make a really big difference. And we can do that by looking at things like how you show up and what makes your team unique. There's also some more practical ways in which to break this down. Only do what works. I don't know, I don't love Excel spreadsheets. If GPT-4 loves them more than I do and can help me analyze them, I'm cool with it. If there's something you're not that good at, put your ego to the side and give it to other people and empower them to do the job better than you. The 80-20 rule at Google is one of my favorites. I don't know if you know this, but Google has this great rule where they allow their staff to spend 20% of their time working on passion products. Do you know what is one of the passion products that came out of this rule, this 80-20 rule? Gmail. Can you imagine? It's not even like something silly that we don't know about, like Google Wave or whatever that was. No, Gmail came out of this rule. Give your people some time, especially now. Use your space wisely. This is the Green School in Bali. These kids learn on like an open terrace. They grow their own tomatoes. It's amazing. What can you do with the space that South Africa provides you? How can you build more space for your creative genius so that you have foresight and you're not just dealing with crashes? Get your timing right. Yes, timing is important, but so is momentum. That means every single day you're in the hustle. That means that every single day you're training your team as if they're athletes, as if they're getting ready for opening night, as if they're on Broadway. Because now is the moment for you guys to wear that cape. It's actually here. And I think your entire company is looking at you to help carry the message forward on what that strategy really needs to be and how to make sense of a rapidly changing world. Who and how you're hiring, get that chief AI strategist on board. This doesn't have to be a older person executive. Maybe you want to start with somebody who's in university who's playing with this stuff regardless. Don't be afraid to try. If you can experiment with somebody who actually enjoys playing with these tools, do it. One of my team members sits in Mombasa and loves playing with these tools. I ask her to play with them and record videos for me and summarize what works and what doesn't. Because I don't always have time, but I do need to know what's going on. So she plays with it, she records a video, she's like, hey, Jos, this works, this doesn't, this is not so good, this is fantastic. Finally, I'd like to end with this story. I don't know if you know this experiment with these kindergartners, but it's a group of kindergartners, a group of lawyers, a group of CEOs, and a group of business school students. And they were all tasked with a specific job, which was to build a tall tower. But to build that tall tower, they only had a couple of tools. They had some yard, they had some sticky tape, they had a measurement tape, and they had to build the tallest tower that they could using just these tools. Kindergartners, CEOs, lawyers, and business school students. How many of you would want to compete against the lawyers? Because you think you can beat them at building this tower. You got this. All right. How many of you would want to build against the CEOs? Your CEO is not here today, so if you want to raise your hand, you can. All right. How many of you would want to go against the business school students? How many of you would want to go against the kindergartners? One brave soul out there. I see you, sir. Every single time, the kindergartners would win. Not just by a little bit. On average, their tower is 27 inches, followed by the CEOs at 21, followed by the lawyers at 15, followed by the business school students at an average of 11. Thank you.